Hey everyone, welcome back to Medieval Historian. Tonight's video is all about one of the most brutally underrated roles in the medieval world. The cook, not the glamorous, apron-clad, smiling chef we picture today, whipping up Michelin-starred masterpieces with tweezers and pink Himalayan salt. No, this was a life of open flames, spoiled meat, and pressure that could literally cost you your head. Think your job is stressful? Try cooking for a noble who might order your execution if his pheasant is under-seasoned. Today you've got grocery delivery, recipe apps, and a fridge that hums like a loyal pet. Back then, you were praying the meat didn't move on its own, and hoping no one slipped poison into the stew, because if they did, guess who gets blamed? So, before we begin, and before you get too comfortable, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you don't miss the next descent into the past. And tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from, and what time is it right now where you are? I'm just a nerd who loves digging into history's darkest corners, and it always blows my mind to see people tuning in from all over the world. Seriously, it's incredible to see this growing community, people from every corner of the planet, gathering to explore stories that history books left behind. Now, let's step into the smoke, the chaos, and the scalding nightmare that was the medieval kitchen. Why it was horrible to be a medieval cook. So, here you are, standing in the heart of a medieval kitchen, and the first thing you notice isn't the food. It's the heat, not a gentle warmth, not a cozy fireplace glow. No. This is an oppressive, searing, lung-scorching furnace masquerading as a workplace. There is no chimney. The smoke has nowhere to go. It swirls and thickens, hugging the beams, coating your throat, soaking into your clothes. You cough once, then twice, and quickly realize no one around you is concerned, because they've been breathing this hell cloud for years. You will too, assuming you last that long. There's no time to adjust. The kitchen doesn't wait. Pigs are hanging, half bled, dripping into buckets that splash onto your boots. A dog scuttles past with a stolen bone. Someone's yelling about a missing ladle. The floor is sticky in some places, slimy in others, and vaguely warm where it really shouldn't be. Rats live here too, bold and well-fed. You can't blame them. They're just doing better at this job than you are. In a corner, barrels ferment into sour ale, and forgotten soups bubble in pots that haven't been properly cleaned since last year's harvest feast. Hygiene, you ask? Only if you count fire as a cleanser and smoke as a seasoning. The equipment is another horror show. You won't find iron stoves or polished pans. Instead, you get blackened cauldrons with thick crusts of burnt stew from last week, still clinging like barnacles, and knives so dull they're more likely to bruise meat than cut it. Your utensils are bent, warped, handmade, and haunted. You use wooden spoons so overused they have personalities. Your hands are your most reliable tools, but they're blistered, cracked, and reek of onions and failure. You will never be clean again. Not really. This kitchen serves not just a lord and lady, but their extended families, their staff, their random guests, and the occasional noble who arrives unannounced, expecting a 10-course feast. You are not allowed to fail. You are not even allowed to falter. And if the food is late, or cold, or too bland, the consequences aren't just professional, they're personal. In the worst cases, they're fatal. A disappointed noble is a dangerous noble. You don't want to be the reason someone reaches for their sword before their spoon. And yet, this is your life now. 16 hours a day, choking on smoke, battling fire, gutting animals, chopping, stewing, stirring, burning, serving, and scrubbing. No glory, no credit, just raw survival disguised as labor. You work in the shadows while others feast in candlelight. Your job is to create the illusion of comfort, the fantasy of abundance. all while standing barefoot in a puddle of blood and spilled beer. Welcome to the medieval kitchen. You're already late. You did it. You landed the role of medieval cook. Hired, they said, as if you filled out an application and aced an interview. But really, someone needed to boil the bones and gut the eels, and you were either too desperate or too unlucky to say no. This isn't a promotion. It's a life sentence wrapped in an apron. You're not the head of a culinary dream team. You're the first responder to a non-stop food emergency. There are no training manuals, no mentors. Your education begins when someone dumps a half-dead goose on the table and tells you it needs to be fit for a baron by sundown. Translation: make it taste like nobility and not like the barnyard it crawled out of. And while it might sound impressive to be the cook, the truth is you're less artist, more crisis manager. You're the one tasked with transforming a mismatched pile of half-rotten ingredients into something vaguely edible for people who believe spices are status symbols and subtlety is a sin. Oh, and they want spectacle. Your dishes need to impress. They want swans that bleed wine, pies that sing, and loaves that resemble cathedrals. And they want it all in 2 hours with zero warning. You don't have a staff, just a terrified child and a half-blind woman with a limp who used to be a laundress before she burned her hands and got reassigned. They don't know what they're doing, you don't either, but now there are turnips to peel, boars to roast, and a vat of pottage that smells like someone died in it. You pretend you know what's going on because no one wants a panicked cook. They want a magician. They want a miracle worker. They want their bellies full and their egos stroked. And heaven help you if there's a feast. Suddenly, your workload triples. You're expected to prepare for 50, maybe 100 guests. Some might arrive uninvited, bring their own demands, and throw their cups if their meat is under-seasoned. You'll be working in a sweat-soaked haze, fighting fire, slicing meat, avoiding accusations of poisoning, and praying that the dogs don't run off with the bread again. The pressure is constant, the stakes are high. And the reward? If the Lord eats without complaint, you live to cook another day. But there's no pride here, no legacy. You'll never be remembered for your culinary contributions. If you're lucky, you'll be forgotten entirely. If you're unlucky, your name will be written into local gossip as the one who burned the trout on St. George's Day. Being hired as a medieval cook isn't an opportunity. It's a challenge. One you never asked for. One you'll probably regret. But it's too late now. The goose is bleeding on the table, and the baron is hungry. If you're imagining a neat little cookbook tucked under your arm, something with crisp parchment pages and carefully measured instructions, go ahead and throw that fantasy into the fire pit. In the medieval kitchen, there are no recipes. Not really. What you have instead are vague recollections, superstitious advice, and the haunting echo of, "My grandmother used to say." Everything is oral tradition, passed down from one half-literate cook to the next, often by someone whose best culinary achievement was not poisoning their employer. You're not following a formula, you're chasing ghosts. Cooking, then, becomes a game of improvisation. There's no standard measurement for salt, no agreement on what constitutes a pinch, and if someone tells you to boil something until it sings, they mean until it hisses, bubbles, screams, or evaporates entirely, whichever comes first. Cook it well means nothing. Add herbs could mean mint, could mean nightshade. The lines between healing and homicide are blurry at best. A dash too much of the wrong plant, and you're not flavoring dinner, you're preparing a funeral. Every manor has its quirks. One lord swears that fish must always be cooked with leeks. Another bans onions outright, claiming they make him hear voices. Superstition runs thicker than broth. Some cooks toss bread crusts into the pot to trap evil spirits. Others stir counterclockwise because a clockwise motion invites bad harvests. You nod, you obey, and you pretend it all makes sense because questioning tradition is a surefire way to lose your position. Or worse, be accused of witchcraft. Remember, it's not just about taste. It's about balance, symbolism, divine favor, and sometimes what the stars are doing that day. Then there's the challenge of seasonal chaos. Forget reliable ingredients. You cook with what's available, which changes constantly and without mercy. One week you have apples, the next they're rotten. Sometimes the eggs have yolks. Sometimes they have feathers. You learn to substitute on instinct, sour milk for cream, barley for wheat, sorrow for spice. Every meal is an experiment conducted under pressure, in a room full of knives, flames, and judgmental nobles. And let's not forget your mentors, the other cooks, each more superstitious than the last. They won't share techniques. They hoard secrets like treasure. Want to know how that eel pie was made? Too bad. That recipe died with old Agnes 3 winters ago, and she took the trick with her into the ground. What's left is her scrawled note on the pantry door. Boil it till it stops moving. Despite all this, you're expected to produce food that looks intentional. Feasts must be glorious, not guesswork. And yet, you're basically winging it with half-spoiled ingredients, arbitrary advice, and muscle memory developed from pure panic. When something goes right, it's called genius. When it goes wrong, it's your head on the block. There's no margin for error. You can't explain that the recipe came from a drunken goat herder who once saw a monk do it this way. You just smile and say it's tradition. In the end, medieval cooking isn't culinary art, it's culinary alchemy, where every pot is a gamble and every meal is a whispered prayer. There's no book to guide you, no chart to follow. Just rumors, old wives' tales, and your own stubborn will to survive. It's one thing to cook without recipes. It's another to cook with ingredients that are actively plotting your demise. In the medieval kitchen, your raw materials aren't fresh, clean, or predictable. They are wild, fermented, unwashed, and frequently alive in ways they should not be. Meat doesn't come shrink-wrapped and labeled with a polite expiration date. It comes warm, bloody, and buzzing with flies. Sometimes it comes gray. Occasionally it walks in on its own. Your job is to make it not just edible, but delicious, without modern refrigeration, without certainty, and often without knowing exactly what animal it used to be. You don't get first pick at the market. You get what's left over, what's affordable, what's borderline. The butcher hands you offcuts that still twitch. Poultry that smells like wet hay. Fish with eyes clouded over and scales that stick like glue. You sniff it, prod it, hold it up to the fire and make a choice. Cook it fast, drown it in ale, and hope for the best. Or throw it out and risk going hungry. Spoiled food isn't an accident here. It's a weekly ritual. You learn to cut around the mold, scrape the green fuzz off the cheese, or just call it seasoning and move on. Vegetables don't offer salvation either. They're rarely fresh, often worm-eaten, and nearly always root-based. You're lucky to see anything green that isn't a weed. Potatoes haven't arrived from the New World yet, so forget your fries. You're stuck with turnips, leeks, onions, and whatever odd things the forager found this week. Did that mushroom come from the safe part of the forest, or the part that kills goats? You won't know until after someone eats it. Maybe not even then. Then there's the grain, the bread of life. And sometimes the bread of death. Rye, barley, and oats are your staples, but when harvests are lean or storage goes wrong, you're dealing with mildew, insect droppings, or worse, ergot. A toxic fungus that grows on rye and causes hallucinations, convulsions, and occasionally mass hysteria. Entire villages have danced themselves to death under its spell. You might just be trying to bake a loaf, but if that grain's infected, you're about to serve a side of visions and seizures. Try explaining that to the steward. Even your liquids are risky. Water is rarely safe to drink, teeming with parasites and waste. So you cook with weak ale or sour wine instead. They won't kill you immediately, just slowly wear down your liver while keeping the stew palatable. And milk? Good luck. It turns sour before you finish boiling it. Butter is chunky, cheese is hairy, and if you find an egg that isn't half rotten, it's probably a miracle. Or a chicken laying curses instead of yolks. So every time you step into that kitchen, you're not preparing a meal. You're walking onto a battlefield. You're fighting against decay, rot, parasites, and invisible poisons. You prod, sniff, shake, scrape, boil, soak, and pray. Because in this job, it's not just about flavor. It's about survival. Your ingredients want you dead. And if you're not careful, they'll get their wish. There's a reason no one romanticizes the medieval kitchen. Not even poets. It's the one room in a manor that gets less attention than the privy, and for good reason. Because the medieval kitchen isn't just chaotic, it's cursed. You walk into what feels less like a room and more like the open maw of an active volcano. Walls blackened by years of smoke, ceilings sweating grease, and a fire that never dies, never rests, and never stops trying to roast more than just the meat. The hearth is the heart of this place, and it beats with rage. The room is loud, not just noisy, but thunderous. There's the crackling of flames, the hiss of fat dripping onto red-hot stones, the clang of ladles against cauldrons, and the relentless shouting. Orders, complaints, curses, some in Latin, others in words you wouldn't dare repeat near a priest. And underneath it all, the wet slap of raw meat being prepared on slabs of wood that double as cutting boards and occasional stools. There's no ventilation. Smoke has nowhere to go but sideways into your eyes and lungs. You don't breathe so much as endure the air, thick with the aroma of charcoal, old onions, and wet dog. And the floors, uneven, sticky, and dangerously slick. You're always either slipping or stomping. Ash clings to your boots, bones crunch underfoot. Somewhere near the corner, yesterday's stew has formed a crust with its own ambitions. The layout? Designed by someone who hated cooks. Narrow walkways force you to sidestep like a crab while carrying scalding pots. There are no shelves, just hooks, beams, and vague piles of storage. Hot iron pots are everywhere, balanced on coals, hanging from chains, or just waiting to burn someone for looking at them wrong. Knives, cleavers, spits, all dangerously close and terribly dull or rusted. You will burn yourself. You will cut yourself. You will trip, slip, and hit your head on a beam that no one thought to raise. But despite all of this, it never stops. The kitchen is eternal. There is no off switch. The fire is fed day and night. The demand is constant. No holiday, no Sabbath, no moment of silence. Because upstairs, nobles are always hungry. Someone always wants roasted fowl, a dripping leg of lamb, or stewed prunes and honey. And you, the sweaty, blistered, smoke-drenched cook, are the only one keeping the machine running. No one visits the kitchen unless they're lost or looking for someone to blame. It's not a place for guests. It's not even a place for you. But it's where you live now. You dream of smoke. You wake to fire. And if hell had a roof, this would be it. Fire is your master here. Not just a tool, not just a threat. An omnipresent, untamed beast that dominates your work and your life. Everything you do is centered around flame. You don't control it. You negotiate with it, plead with it, and occasionally curse it loud enough for the kitchen boys to pretend they didn't hear you. There are no thermostats, no dials, no safe words, just burning wood, glowing coals, and the hope that it doesn't get out of hand. Again. You're cooking on an open hearth wide enough to roast an ox, but temperamental enough to torch your eyebrows. No safety screens. No guards. If you lean too far, that's your tunic catching fire. If you swing a pan too fast, you're flinging hot grease onto the nearest unlucky soul. And in a room where everything is flammable, cloth, straw, wooden beams, your patience, it doesn't take much for a small spark to become a raging catastrophe. There's always something burning. Meat, bread, your hands. The smell of singed hair is just part of the background now. You've learned to ignore the sizzling sound of flesh that isn't food. You only panic when you smell your own skin. Blisters are badges of survival. Burn scars are part of the uniform. Everyone in the kitchen carries them. No one talks about them. Wood is precious, which makes controlling heat even more of a gamble. Too little, and the stew sits half raw. Too much, and you're serving charcoal duck again. There's no luxury of adjustment. You move the pot. You fan the flames with a board. You stack bricks under the cauldron and hope it doesn't tip. Every adjustment is a risk. Every shift of the fire is a negotiation between survival and complete chaos. And then there's the smoke. It doesn't just sting, it suffocates. You try to keep the fire hot enough to cook, but not so hot that the entire room becomes a funeral pyre. You squint through the haze, sweat pouring down your back. Your hair soaked, your sleeves smoldering at the cuffs. You shout over the roar of flames, pray over the crackle of wood, and dodge coals like they're curses from an angry god. There are no fire exits. If this place goes up, your best bet is to run into the pantry and hope the flour sacks smother you before the smoke does. And don't even think about calling for help. The steward will blame you for starting it, and the Lord will demand dinner anyway, burnt or not. Open flames light your day, fuel your labor, and threaten your life. You don't cook with fire, you survive it. By now, you've accepted that fire is a necessary evil. What you haven't prepared for is its partner in crime, the smoke. It's not just a background detail, it's the silent executioner of the medieval kitchen. It seeps into everything. Your eyes, your lungs, your skin. You wake up coughing and go to sleep wheezing, assuming you sleep at all. Smoke doesn't rise politely and exit through a chimney. It rolls low and thick, hugging the floorboards, clinging to your clothes, curling into the folds of your tunic like an unwanted guest. Breathing, it is not optional. It is mandatory. You don't inhale, you endure. Every cook in the kitchen walks around half-blinded, blinking through the haze, eyes permanently red and stinging like they've wept for hours. Which, in a way, they have. You learn to squint and slice at the same time. Your tears fall not for sadness or sentiment, but because the air itself wants you to cry. And don't expect relief. There are no windows, no ventilation shafts. The walls are lined with soot, as if the entire building is built from charcoal and regret. There's no escape. The only thing that filters the smoke is your own damaged lungs. But it's not just your breathing that suffers. It's your brain. The smoke dulls you, makes you slow, heavy, tired. After a few hours, your thoughts move like cold porridge. Your hands follow commands a second too late. You drop things, you forget things, you feel your own mind softening, like butter too long near the fire. It's not just the fatigue of hard labor, it's the oxygen slipping away one smoky breath at a time. Long term, it means chronic coughing, blackened teeth, early death. Short term, it means you burn the stew and get flogged. And let's talk about smell. You think smoke smells good? Like a campfire? Not this smoke. This is a mix of scorched fat, overcooked onions, greasy cloth, and wet wood that never dried right. You smell like it, every part of you. Your hair, your hands, your breath. People step back when you walk by. Animals avoid you. The other staff complain, not because they're clean, but because even their stink can't compete with yours. Eventually, the smoke stops bothering you. Not because it's gone, but because you've lost the ability to care. It's like living inside a slowly burning house, where everyone is too tired to leave and too busy to notice. You get used to the sting, the haze, the dizzying heat. You stop trying to escape it. You just blink through the blur and keep cooking. Because the smoke may get you first, but the Baron's dinner is still due. If you were hoping to find sleek utensils, razor-sharp knives, or anything resembling a modern kitchen gadget, forget it. Your tools as a medieval cook aren't just primitive. They're practically prehistoric. Everything you handle is dull, heavy, chipped, or rusted, and most of it doubles as a blunt weapon. A wooden spoon the size of an oar, a cleaver that wobbles when it cuts, a ladle carved by someone who gave up halfway through. These are your instruments, and they hate you. Let's start with the knives. You might get one if you're lucky, and it probably came from a blacksmith who sharpened it once, last harvest. It doesn't slice so much as push. You hack through meat like you're felling a tree, and you're more likely to bruise vegetables than julienne them. Your fingers are in constant danger. Gloves? You wish. You're gripping wet handles with scorched palms, praying the blade doesn't slip and send you to the monastery's infirmary, if it's even open that day. Your pots? Cast iron cauldrons so large you could drown in them, and occasionally feel like you will. They take hours to heat and even longer to cool, and once they're hot, they stay that way like angry relics of the underworld. Moving one requires 2 people and a small act of divine intervention. And they're never clean. No matter how much you scrub, the ghosts of meals past linger in the crevices. Old grease, burned onions, regret. Your fire tools, tongs that don't grip, spits that bend under the weight of a roast. You're turning whole animals over open flame with implements forged during a thunderstorm by someone half asleep. You don't adjust the heat with finesse. You shove things around and hope for balance. Or you use a stick, a burnt, splintering stick from the same woodpile you cook with. Baking is no better. There are no ovens in the kitchen, not the way you'd imagine. There are pits, hearths, and sometimes hot stones. You bake bread by placing it on an ash-covered slab and guessing when it's done based on how much of it hasn't caught fire. Precision is not a concept here. It's a wish. You poke things, sniff things, and listen for sizzles that don't mean death. Storage tools. Baskets that shed, sacks that leak, barrels that swell and rot. Everything you put your food into comes back with a little extra. Bugs, moisture, splinters, or mold. Even your cutting board is just a flat rock or a slice of tree trunk stained with 100 meals and maybe a little blood. And yet, despite all this, you keep cooking. Because it's all you have. Your tools are primitive. Your fire is wild. Your workspace is a hazard zone. But you're still expected to deliver art, or at least something no one chokes on. You don't need modern gear. You need luck, guts, and calloused hands, because these tools won't save you. They'll test you. The moment you step into a medieval kitchen, the first thing that hits you, harder than the heat, harder than the smoke, is the smell. It doesn't waft or linger. It attacks. It crawls into your nose and refuses to leave. It's not one smell. It's layers of them, stacked like a grotesque cake made of nightmares and leftovers. Burnt hair, old fat, unwashed bodies, stewing bones, boiling cabbage. Something sweet that shouldn't be sweet. Something sour that should have never existed. You inhale, gag, then carry on. Because no one else seems bothered. And you can't look weak in a room full of people who smell just as bad as you do. There's the meat corner, of course, if you can call it that. carcasses hanging from hooks, some fresh, most not. Blood pools on the floor, mixing with muddy boot prints and something that might have once been gravy. You try not to step in it. You fail. There's a stale bitterness to dried meat, but also a nauseating sweetness when rot sets in just beneath the surface. You smell it even when you're not near it. It clings to your nostrils like a curse, and the foul. Imagine damp feathers left in a sunlit room for a week. Now imagine plucking them while someone vomits nearby. That's close. The bread smells like ash, because it is ash. Baked beside a fire, covered in dust and filled with grit, it's more a survival mechanism than a source of pleasure. Then there's the cheese. Tangy, yes, but also sharp in the way that suggests something inside is fighting back. Hard cheeses are bearable. Soft cheeses are personal threats. They ooze, they squirm, they whisper in tongues you don't want to understand. And then there's you. You are part of the problem. Your clothes haven't been washed in weeks, maybe months. Your apron was white once. Now it's the color of gravy and shame. Your hair smells like onions, your hands like grease. You scrub them in cold water when you can find it. But it doesn't help. The smell lives in your pores now. You could bathe in rose water and still stink of tallow and trout. Even spices, rare and precious, offer little salvation. A pinch of cinnamon might cut through the foul air for a moment. But then the wind shifts, and the scent of boiling entrails reclaims the space with vengeance. There is no clean smell here, only strong and stronger. You stop noticing the difference. You stop trying to escape it. And when you do leave the kitchen, if you ever leave, the smell leaves with you. It walks beside you like a shadow. Because in the medieval kitchen, smell is more than a nuisance. It's a living presence. It shapes your days, seeps into your dreams, and marks you as surely as soot or sweat. You carry it like a badge, like a warning, like a scar. Freshness is a fantasy. In the medieval kitchen, rot isn't something you avoid. It's something you manage. You don't toss out spoiled food. You repurpose it. Hide it. Dress it up with spices, ale, or a long boil until it stops twitching. The entire concept of expiration is theoretical. If it's not moving under its own power, it's still on the menu. And even then, sometimes you just cook faster. You learn to trust your instincts or ignore them. If something smells a little off, you scrape off the worst bits and pretend you didn't notice. You mash the soft part into stew. You stir the sourness into soup. If bread has a green patch, cut around it. Cheese growing a second rind, serve it to someone important and call it aged. You're not a chef, you're a food illusionist turning rot into flavor with nothing but desperation and deceit. And it's not just the ingredients. The pots themselves are seasoned with decades of grime. You don't scrub them clean. You fear what might be underneath. Layers of burnt fat, fermented pottage, and whatever crawled in last week form a crust that sticks like ritual binding. It's considered bad luck to wash it too well. Some say it's what gives the food its character. You call it what it is, contamination. Fermentation is another word for survival. Leftovers become tomorrow's breakfast. Yesterday's spoiled porridge? Add water and herbs. It's pottage now. Wine turned to vinegar? Use it. Ale gone sour? Serve it. Fruit that's gone mushy gets stewed into sludge and passed off as dessert. Sugar is rare. Honey is precious. But decay is always free. The line between delicious and deadly is razor thin, and sometimes the only way to know is by who keels over first. Meat is the biggest gamble. You salt it, hang it, dry it. But if the weather turns or the storeroom leaks, the whole batch sours. That smell, you know it now. sour iron and decay with a hint of defeat. You rub herbs on it to mask the stink. You roast it until it shrinks and toughens. If it looks black but smells fine, serve it anyway. They'll think it's a new recipe. And when it comes to leftovers, there's no such thing as waste. Everything gets reused, even the bones. Boiled again for broth. Scraps scraped into trenchers. Crumbs collected for stuffing. You can't afford to throw anything away, not even dignity. You're feeding dozens, sometimes hundreds, and the storeroom isn't restocking itself. Every piece of rot you salvage is one less reason for the steward to question your competence or your loyalty. So you don't run from decay. You work with it, you embrace it, because in a world without refrigeration, rot isn't an accident. It's part of the recipe. You'd think salt, just salt, would be the one simple ingredient in your miserable culinary toolbox. But in the Middle Ages, salt isn't a seasoning. It's a symbol of power, a precious mineral, a literal currency. Salt could preserve meat, flavor bread, heal wounds, and buy your way out of trouble. And you? You're a cook. You don't own salt. You beg for it. You hoard it. You pray for it. Because in this kitchen, salt is locked away like a crown jewel and guarded just as tightly. The Lord's steward controls the salt, and he doesn't part with it lightly. You need to request it formally, sometimes in writing, sometimes in person with a tone so polite it hurts your teeth. If he grants your wish, you're given a small pouch, tightly tied, half full, and always counted. Use too much and you'll be accused of theft. Use too little, and the noble complains. Either way, you lose. It's like seasoning with a loaded crossbow at your back. Salt preserves meat, yes, but only when used properly, and you never have enough. So you ration it like gold. One cut of beef gets it, the rest, pray the winter air is kind, and when the salted meat is served, you pretend the hard, jerky-like texture is intentional. Salt is also used to clean wounds, which is convenient, since every cook ends up with burns, blisters, and deep gashes. But even for that, you hesitate, because once it's used, it's gone. You weigh the worth of your pain against tomorrow's soup. Spilling it is practically a death sentence. Not just for superstition, though there's plenty of that too, but for waste. You spill salt, and someone might report you. Careless with the Lord's spice, they'll say. Too generous with sacred minerals. You clean it up like you're handling holy ashes, and heaven forbid someone steals it. Theft of salt is a real crime, and if they suspect you're pocketing it to trade with the baker's boy or bribe the watchman, you're done. Salt cellars, tiny bowls of sacred crystals, are reserved for the noble's table. While you're scraping soot from a cauldron, they're pinching flakes onto pheasant with the air of Roman emperors. You might go weeks without tasting it yourself. Your own food is bland, gray, and punishing. But theirs must be perfect, rich, balanced, salted just enough to remind them they're better than you. So when you hold that tiny pouch in your calloused hands, you don't think of flavor. You think of survival. Salt is power. Salt is status. Salt is the difference between meat that lasts a season and meat that kills a man, and it's worth more than you'll ever be. Inventory is a fantasy. Restocking is a miracle. In the medieval kitchen, you are always missing something critical. You're out of eggs, out of barley, out of clean water, out of time. You learn to cook like a magician with missing props. You adapt, substitute, invent, and lie. Your best dishes are born from desperation, not inspiration. And if someone asks why the pie tastes like parsley and regret, you smile and say it's seasonal. Need flour? Too bad, it's full of weevils. Sugar? Not unless a ship just docked from Venice and the steward's in a generous mood. Butter? Maybe. If the cows didn't die this winter and the churn didn't freeze, you build your meals around what hasn't spoiled, what hasn't run off, or what hasn't been stolen by a starving scullion. Planning ahead is a joke. You plan backwards, starting with what's still edible, and then trying to make it look intentional. Sometimes ingredients disappear because someone took them. Other times they were never there to begin with. The Lord promised a boar. The hunter never returned. The miller claimed his grain was taken by bandits. The truth? Everyone's hoarding, everyone's lying. And the cook? The cook is expected to solve it with a turnip and half a leek. Your storage is a damp, vermin-infested room with wooden barrels that leak and sacks that tear when you so much as look at them. Rats chew holes faster than you can patch them. You place a stone over the flour bag and pray it doesn't move tomorrow. In summer, your ingredients rot. In winter, they freeze solid. There is no season of plenty, only different kinds of shortage. And then, the orders come, a feast, a gathering. A dozen nobles demanding roasted game, pastries, sauces, and wine-poached pears. You open your pantry to find dried beans, stale bread, and a dead pigeon. And yet, no one upstairs wants excuses. They want extravagance. They want magic. They want you to turn famine into a festival. And if you don't, it's not the steward's failure, it's yours. So, you stretch, you fake, you bluff, you dice the last carrot into microscopic bits and claim it's a garnish. You cut stew with water and call it a broth. You mash dried peas and onions and insist it's a delicacy from the East. Every missing ingredient becomes a test of your creativity and your survival. Because you're not just feeding people, you're feeding expectations. And when you're always out of everything, the only thing you can rely on is your own ability to make something from nothing, and hope it doesn't kill anyone. Cooking in a medieval kitchen is bad enough. Cooking for the nobility, that's where bad becomes dangerous. You're not just making meals, you're walking a tightrope blindfolded, balancing flaming platters and fragile egos. The noble class doesn't eat, they demand. Every dish must impress, every bite must flatter. You're not feeding hunger, you're feeding pride, politics, and pageantry. And if one spoiled lord decides your mutton is dry, your reward may be exile or execution. They don't understand food. They understand presentation. A perfectly roasted duck means nothing if it isn't arranged with flowers, gilded, or bleeding wine when carved. Forget the flavor. Focus on the spectacle. A noble wants to be dazzled. They want dishes shaped like swans, pies that sing, and sauces so rich they could bankrupt a peasant. And you, cook, are the invisible artist. If they applaud, it's for the steward. If they scowl, it's your head on the chopping block. And let's not pretend this is some rare ceremonial affair. Nobles feast constantly. Breakfasts are simple, but dinners? Extravagant, daily. Because luxury isn't just enjoyed, it's displayed. Your day never ends. The bell rings, and you're back at it. Roasting, boiling, baking, slicing. You can't repeat dishes too often. You must adapt to whims. Lady Eleanor is suddenly allergic to leeks. Lord Bertram demands more venison. The visiting bishop refuses to eat anything with garlic. Your entire meal plan collapses in 5 seconds. You serve them directly, or close to it. Food goes from your soot-covered hands to polished trenchers carried upstairs by servants wearing better clothes than you've ever touched. You never see the nobles, not really, but you hear them. Their complaints echo down the halls. Their praise? Never. You know your food was acceptable only because no one came running back with a knife and a scowl. And heaven help you if someone falls ill. Did the noble overeat? Was the meat undercooked? Did some spoiled fig ferment too long? It doesn't matter. If a noble so much as burps twice in a row, you become suspect. Rumors of poisoning spread fast. a bad belly becomes a political plot. You find yourself questioned, watched, maybe imprisoned, just because some spoiled baron couldn't stop himself at his 7th course. Serving the nobility is never just about food. It's theater. It's survival. You are a performer, a scapegoat, a background player in a never-ending act of status and self-indulgence. They dine like gods, and you suffer like a sinner. But smile, cook. They're clapping for the show. You might think cooking is a private task, just you, your pot, your ingredients. But in the medieval world, you're not cooking for a family. You're cooking for a system, a hierarchy, a fortress of interwoven responsibilities and unrelenting expectations. You're feeding knights, squires, servants, pages, guards, clergy, and hangers-on. The kitchen isn't the heart of the home. It's the engine of the entire feudal machine, and you're the one shoveling in the coal. Each day begins with feeding the lowest ranks, the workers, the grooms, the night watch. Gruel, porridge, bread crusts, whatever you can scrape together before dawn. No one thanks you. They eat standing up, half asleep, slopping it down before labor begins. Then come the mid-morning demands. Clerks and scribes need their small meals. The priest requests warm broth. Pages need extra meat. The steward wants something to keep him sharp. Meanwhile, you haven't even started on lunch, which for the main hall will include multiple courses for a dozen nobles and at least twice as many dignitaries and surprise guests. Every bite of food served sustains the power structure. The guards need calories to patrol. The knights need meat for strength. The children need something to keep them from crying. Every missing meal means a ripple of disruption. If the bread runs out, tempers flare. If the beer is warm, complaints rain down. If a roast is undercooked, someone might refuse to march to battle. The cook doesn't just fill stomachs. The cook keeps order. And yet your kitchen is always short-staffed, always under-resourced. You run a crew of weary scullions, overworked helpers, and terrified boys whose only job is to chase rats and keep the fire going. There's no break, no rotation. Just a constant cycle of prep, cook, serve, clean, repeat. Your hands blister, your back aches, and your mind races. What's left? What's spoiled? What can be stretched? At mealtime, you don't eat. You hover, you watch, you listen, because every plate you send out is a statement. Every bowl of stew is a gamble. If the nobles are pleased, the manor runs smoothly. If they aren't, chaos follows. Whispers start. Fingers point. You're the cook. Clearly, you've slipped. Clearly, you're losing control. Feeding the manor isn't about nourishment. It's about maintaining the illusion that this castle is abundant, that this system is just, that everything is under control, and when that illusion cracks, you're the first to fall through. In the medieval kitchen, meal planning is a term people use centuries later when they have things like clocks, calendars, and functioning supply chains. Back then, you weren't planning meals. You were surviving them. Each day wasn't organized by a menu. It was shaped by disaster. What's rotting? What's missing? What noble changed their mind about eating fish today because Mercury is in retrograde or they just feel off? Every meal is a sudden problem to solve, not a process to follow. You wake up to chaos. Maybe a sack of grain burst overnight and rats had a party. Maybe the butcher delivered the wrong meat, or no meat. Maybe someone dropped the stew pot and now you're cooking for 30 with nothing but turnips and prayer. Planning ahead doesn't mean tomorrow. It means surviving to the next bell without a kitchen fire, a missing platter, or a noble tantrum that ends with your face in the moat. The worst part? Everyone thinks you do plan. The steward expects smooth service. The lady of the manor assumes her preferences are noted and her meals custom curated. Even the knights think their trenchers appear like magic. But you're scrambling behind the scenes, inventing dishes in real time. You have no recipe, no stable ingredients, just instinct, leftovers, and a wooden spoon you've chewed on out of stress. It gets worse when events pile on. Feast days, surprise guests, religious fasts. The Lord has invited a bishop, or a minor prince, or a cousin you didn't know existed, and they all expect different meals at the same time, none of which you have the ingredients for. Now you're turning yesterday's duck into today's stew and pretending the fish was always supposed to be served cold and limp. You start mixing flavors you wouldn't feed a goat, all because the pantry is down to herbs, vinegar, and questionable cheese. When the meal arrives at the hall, it's a miracle, a minor act of divine intervention. No one sees the panic, the arguments, the burnt fingers and blistered palms. They see hot food and full plates and assume the world is in order. That's your job, to maintain the illusion of control while spinning beneath the surface like a drowning eel. And when someone complains that the bread is dry or the broth too thin, you nod, apologize, and swear to fix it. But in your head, you're screaming, because you didn't plan this meal. You barely survived it. Crisis management isn't a skill, it's your reality. And the crisis, it never ends. Let's talk about what's actually on the menu. Not the fantasy feast that bards sing about, not the roasted peacock and sugared plums painted into the edges of illuminated manuscripts. No, we're talking about the real menu, the cook's menu, the one that lives in the dirt, sweats in the smoke, and clings to the edge of survival. And if you're imagining variety, richness, or joy, think again. The only thing consistent in the kitchen is suffering. It starts with pottage. Your old friend, your constant companion, your bubbling vat of desperation. It's not a dish. It's a concept. A never-ending stew that simmers day after day, changing not by design, but by accident. You toss in whatever's left, onions, oats, a suspicious parsnip, bones from 2 nights ago, maybe a chunk of stale bread. Over time, it thickens into a gluey swamp that feeds servants, scullions, guards, and sometimes the family dog. If you're lucky, there's a bit of meat. If you're not, it's just root vegetables and the faint hope of flavor. Bread comes next. Heavy, coarse, and hard enough to break a tooth. It's made from rye or barley, often bulked up with acorn flour or sawdust during hard times. It doesn't slice. It resists. You don't eat it so much as negotiate with it. If it's moldy, scrape the green off. If it's rock hard, soak it in broth. It's the foundation of every meal. It's also why half the manor has indigestion. Meat? Rare, a luxury, reserved for the nobility and special occasions. When it does appear, it's usually dried, salted, or questionable, and cooked until flavor is no longer a concern, just safety. You roast it black, boil it gray. If it's still chewy, that's just proof it's real. You don't ask where it came from, you just pray it doesn't come back up. And then there are the extras. Gruel for breakfast. Thin, lukewarm, and tasteless. Sometimes cabbage or leeks fried in fat if the kitchen's feeling fancy. Occasionally, a pie filled with eggs, herbs, and regret. On rare days, dessert. Apples stewed into mush, or a slab of honeyed bread that tastes like what bees leave behind when they're angry. Drinks? You're not pouring wine and cheer. You're serving weak ale, brewed just strong enough to kill the waterborne disease, and just weak enough to keep people standing. Tea doesn't exist. Coffee is a rumor. Juice is a dream. You drink what doesn't kill you immediately and thank the stars if it's only mildly sour. That's your menu. Repetitive, grim, and barely edible. But somehow it keeps everyone moving. Barely. You're not making meals. You're making fuel. fuel for a machine that never stops turning. The food isn't designed to delight. It's designed to not kill, usually. Let's not pretend bread in the medieval kitchen is the golden, crusty delight you'd find in a modern bakery. No buttery brioche, no soft sourdough, no flaky melt-in-your-mouth pastries. Medieval bread is none of those things. It's survival food. It's punishment food. And depending on the bake, it could double as a tool, a shield, or a low-level weapon. Because in your hands, bread is not just a carb, it's a challenge. Most loaves are made from rye or barley, sometimes a bit of wheat if you're cooking for the rich. But for everyone else, you bulk it out with anything. Ground acorns, pea flour, even pulverized straw. Why? Because grain is expensive and mouths are many. The result is a heavy, dense, often gritty lump that feels more like a building material than a meal. Cut it wrong and it shatters. Drop it and it leaves a dent. Throw it and you might knock out a kitchen boy. There are trenchers too. Thick slabs of stale bread used in place of plates. The idea is noble enough. Pile food onto a chunk of bread, let it soak up the juices, then feed it to the poor after the nobles are done eating. Except by the time the poor get it, it's cold, soggy, and flavored with noble saliva, not a delicacy, a disaster. But in the kitchen, you still bake them, daily, relentlessly. Because the trencher is tradition, and tradition always wins. Storage is a nightmare. Bread hardens almost immediately, becoming rock-like in texture within a day or two. You can't reheat it, you can't soften it, you can't lie about its age. If it's old, it tastes like dust and regret. If it's moldy, you scrape it and hope no one notices. And yes, people eat it. They eat it because there's nothing else. They eat it because they're starving. They eat it because if they complain, there's a long line of hungry mouths who'll take their place without blinking. Worst of all, the nobility expect perfect bread, warm, aromatic, fluffy inside, golden outside. Never mind that the flour is coarse and the oven is barely more than a hot hole in a wall. You're supposed to perform miracles with this mess, and if the crust is too tough or the color's uneven, you'll hear about it, loudly, from someone who's never needed anything but a cushion. So, yes, bread is essential. Bread is sacred. Bread is power. But in the medieval kitchen, bread is also blunt, rude, stale, angry, and utterly exhausting. You serve it, you fear it, and some days you seriously consider using it to knock out the steward and make a run for the woods. It's not enough for food to taste acceptable. It has to look impressive. The nobles don't eat with their stomachs. They eat with their egos. And when your entire life depends on pleasing people who think peacock feathers belong in pies and fish should be sculpted into towers, presentation isn't an afterthought. It's the battlefield. You're expected to turn whatever scraps the kitchen has left into something that dazzles. If a dish is too plain, it's peasant food. If it's too complex, it's confusing. You must ride the line between rustic charm and regal indulgence, even though your pantry contains about 3 root vegetables and a hunk of cheese that screams when cut. Still, you do it. You carve radishes into roses. You layer dried figs into spirals. You smear goat fat like it's cream. And you plate each trencherscape like your life depends on it. Because sometimes it does. Showmanship matters more than nutrition. A burnt crust can be forgiven if it's hidden under edible flowers. A bland stew might be spared criticism if it's served in a hollowed-out loaf shaped like a lion. You use color, texture, height. Not because anyone appreciates the effort, but because nobility equates extravagance with skill. And to be a good cook in this world is to be part illusionist, part liar. You also compete with yourself. The Lord remembers what you served 3 weeks ago. If today's meal looks simpler, expect questions. Did we offend the cook? Why isn't the gravy golden this time? Has he grown lazy? You haven't. You've just run out of saffron. But instead of saying that, you fake your way through it. A different garnish, a longer name, a dramatic drizzle. You don't serve soup, you serve velvet onion broth with turnip essence. It's just stew with a fancy name, but it buys you time, and you can't trust anyone else to help. Your assistants crush herbs like they're grinding gravel. The boy sent to gather flowers picked weeds. Someone mistook the last of the honey for candle wax and boiled it. You work alone, red-faced and frantic, turning mush into masterpieces and hoping no one looks too closely. The pressure is relentless. No applause, no recognition, just a grunt of approval, or worse, silence. But you keep pushing, you keep plating, because if your meal looks dull, it reflects badly on the Lord. And if the Lord looks bad, someone must be punished. Guess who that usually is? You'd think that after all your back-breaking labor, sourcing, slicing, seasoning, scalding, you'd at least get the satisfaction of seeing your food respected, appreciated, eaten with dignity. But no, this is the Middle Ages, and if you think the nobility knew how to behave at the dinner table, prepare to be crushed. Because when it comes to table manners, these people are savages in silk. For starters, they eat with their hands, not dainty little pinches or elegant bites. We're talking fistfuls, grabbing meat like it's trying to escape, tearing into it with gusto, grease running down their wrists, bones clattering to the floor. They gnaw, they slurp, they belch. A good feast is measured by how loud, messy, and chaotic it is. There are no napkins, no forks, maybe a dull knife and a personal spoon if they remembered to bring their own. Otherwise, it's a shared experience. Which means, yes, one trencher can host 3 mouths and 4 sets of fingers. You do not want to imagine how that stew tastes after the third hand's been in it. Spills are expected. Wine on the tablecloth? Normal. Meat on the floor? Toss it to the hounds. They'll fight over it, barking and snapping underfoot while lords toast and ladies gossip. If you're lucky, no one loses a finger. If you're unlucky, the dog gets it and you're told to bring another roast. And the conversation, equal parts politics, scandal, and complaints about the food. Too cold, too spicy, too bland. Not like last time. Never mind that last time you were using the same ingredients and cooking under the same impossible conditions. Today, their mood is different. That means you failed. You hear all of this secondhand, of course, through whispers from servants or the steward's grim frown. If a noble throws food, it's rarely out of celebration. It's a sign, a warning. This isn't good enough. And the louder their laughter, the more nervous you become, because nobles only laugh when someone else is about to suffer. Don't be fooled by elegance. The hall may be filled with gold candlesticks and embroidered banners, but the table is a war zone. The clatter of dishes, the grunts of overeating men, the groans of overstuffed guests. This isn't fine dining. It's a display of dominance. The table is where hierarchy gets reinforced, one greasy, dripping bite at a time. And you, the cook, are part of the performance. Unseen, unthanked, and always one spilled goblet away from disaster. There are days in the kitchen that blur together in a haze of fire, smoke, and boiling broth. Then there are feast days, days that burn themselves into your brain like a brand. These are not joyful celebrations. They are sieges. And you, cook, are on the front lines, outnumbered, underfed, and expected to pull off miracles with zero sleep and a pantry that was already limping yesterday. The nobles love a feast. Not just the eating of it, but the spectacle. The ritual, the chaos. There are saint days, birthdays, coronations, weddings, harvest festivals, visiting dignitaries, and sometimes just because, any excuse to gorge themselves while showing off to their peers. For you, that means preparing multiple courses, each with layers of complexity, and none of them allowed to resemble the grim food of ordinary days. The scale is monstrous. Roasted swan with gilded beak, pies with live birds baked inside, whole boars stuffed with smaller animals like some horrific culinary nesting doll. You're baking, roasting, boiling, pickling, spicing, all at once. Fires blazing, helpers slipping on grease, the kitchen a battlefield of smoke and shouting. Everything must be perfect. Every garnish must be placed just so. Every platter balanced between indulgence and obscenity. Nobles judge not just taste, but creativity. Have we seen this dish before? Didn't someone else serve fish with nut paste last year? Your menu must be innovative, despite the fact that you're working with the same goat, herbs, and barley you've had all week. There's no rest. You stay up through the night. You sleep standing up. You burn yourself repeatedly and keep going. You lose track of time. You forget to eat. At some point, your body stops complaining. It simply obeys, because the feast must happen. And if one dish is late, or one course comes out lukewarm, it could ruin the Lord's standing. And ruining the Lord's standing means ruining your life. When the feast begins, the hall becomes a theater of gluttony. You can hear the laughter, the music, the clink of goblets. You imagine your food being torn apart, complimented briefly, and then buried under the next spectacle. No one claps for the cook. No one calls you forward. Your triumph is silence. Your success is survival. And when it's finally over, you don't get to rest. You clean. You patch up wounds. You start again. Because tomorrow someone will remember how lovely the feast was and demand another. Roasting meat in a medieval kitchen isn't just a method. It's a ritual, a performance, a desperate attempt to appease the ever-hungry, never-satisfied gods upstairs known as nobility. You haul in the biggest slab you can find, boar, stag, ox, sometimes even whole goats, and still someone will grumble that it's too small. Because in their world, abundance isn't measured by fullness. It's measured by how much is left over to waste. You prep your roast like a warrior dressing for battle. You rub it with herbs you barely have, baste it with precious fat, and spin it slowly over flame for hours. The fire roars, the grease pops, the smell is intoxicating. Your face is red, your arms ache, you've burned yourself twice. And when it's finally done, bronzed, glistening, perfumed with fire and spice, you present it with something bordering on pride, and then they say it's a bit lean, or not quite enough for a second helping. As if you should have dragged in a second ox just in case. As if there's a secret chamber somewhere with backup meat waiting to be summoned at a noble's whim. You explain, carefully, that this was the largest one. That no, the hunter didn't return with more. That yes, it's still hot and seasoned and, well, too late. The mood has soured. The plate is only half full. The roast becomes a symbol. It's not just food, it's a reflection of power. Size matters, quantity matters. The more meat on the table, the more important the feast. The more important the feast, the more respected the host. So, if the roast is small, by noble standards, that shame trickles downward until it's dripping straight into your pan. And don't think offering more sides helps. No one cares about your pottage. No one is impressed with your herb-buttered turnips. They came for meat. Blood, smoke, muscle. They want to hear the crackle of crisp skin, the slicing of fat, the carving of thick slabs falling onto silver plates. If you present them with anything short of that, You're not feeding them, you're insulting them. So you keep roasting. Bigger, hotter, longer. Until the kitchen feels like the inside of a forge and your apron smells like charred ambition. But it's never enough. Because upstairs, someone always has a bigger appetite than you have an animal. And someone always thinks they deserved a second slice. This is not a metaphor. This is not poetic exaggeration. In a medieval kitchen, you are literally always on fire. If not actively ablaze, then dangerously close. Your sleeves smolder. Your hair singes. Your skin blisters. Fire isn't just around you. It's above, below, beside, and occasionally on you. The hearth isn't a neatly contained flame. It's an infernal monster, devouring wood and flinging sparks like curses. There are no safety tools, no mitts, no tongs that work, no fireproof anything. You handle blazing hot iron pots with wet cloths and blind optimism. You stir bubbling cauldrons inches from licking flames, the heat so intense it dries your sweat before it forms. Your hands are a mess of scars, burns over blisters, over older burns. Everyone in the kitchen has them. It's not a question of if you'll get burned. It's how badly and how often. And it's not just the hearth. There are torches, candles, boiling fat, and surprise flare-ups when someone opens a lid too fast. Grease spills onto coals and suddenly you're battling a fire with a jug of beer and sheer panic. Your clothes are always scorched. You learn to pat out flames on yourself like it's normal because it is. Everyone knows what burning wool smells like. Everyone pretends they didn't hear you scream. The walls sweat. The air shimmers. The floor gets so hot you feel it through your boots, assuming you're wearing boots and not just rags wrapped around your feet like most of your assistants. Sometimes the smoke is so thick you can't tell what's on fire and what's just pretending to be. And if the fire spreads, there is no plan. There is only run or burn. Kitchens go up like kindling, and if yours does, the Lord still expects dinner to be served. You're not just cooking, you're dodging. You're crouching beside the flame with a ladle in one hand and a blister forming under your apron. You don't even flinch anymore, it's just part of the day. Someone yells, "Hot pan," and another cook yells, "Too late," and you all carry on, slightly singed, slightly insane. Eventually, you stop noticing the pain. You grow calluses in places you didn't think skin could harden. You learn to carry firewood with one hand and balance a boiling pot with the other. You're a cook. You're a flame tamer. You're a walking scorch mark with a wooden spoon. And yes, you're always on fire. You'd think that after all the roasting, basting, and blistering, your job as the cook would end when the meat hits the table. It doesn't, because now comes the carving, a performance as dangerous as it is delicate. You're not just slicing meat, you're offering it up for judgment. And if you slip, miss, or falter, you don't just ruin the roast, you invite insult, suspicion, sometimes punishment. Because meat carving in front of nobles is less a task and more a ritualized trial by blade. It's done in public, in the hall, sometimes in total silence. The roasted animal, boar, venison, peacock, swan, gets presented with dramatic flair. Everyone watches. You step forward, knife in hand, trying not to shake as 40 hungry eyes track your every move. Your blade, probably dull. Your hands, still recovering from fire and grease burns. But no one cares. They expect clean cuts, perfect slices, bones separated with grace and precision. You're supposed to be a sculptor of sinew, an artist of the platter. You get one chance. If you fumble, if you carve too thick or too thin, if the skin tears or the meat falls apart, it reflects badly not just on the roast, but on the host. Nobles hate to be embarrassed. and you, the humble cook, are the nearest target for their wrath. Was the bird dry before you carved it? Was that slice meant to look like a battlefield? Tell me, did you study butchery under a blind priest? They mock with wine in hand, knives tapping against the table, while you try not to drop the platter. You also have to know the hierarchy. Which part goes to which person? The Lord gets the best cut, the tender loin, the juiciest slice. The honored guest gets the next best. The priest, something symbolic and humble. Get it wrong and you've accidentally committed a political insult. Worse, if there's not enough of the best part to go around, someone will assume favoritism. Congratulations, you've just ignited a feud. And the tension isn't just emotional, it's physical. That knife is heavy. The roast is slippery. The platter is scorching hot. If it falls, if you cut yourself, if anything splashes, you'll be remembered forever as the idiot who bled on the lamb. Some lords carry knives at their side not for protection, but for carving critique. You make a mistake, and suddenly the heirloom dagger is in the roast, carving it properly while you're dismissed in disgrace. Carving is the finale to your performance. But it's not applause you're waiting for. It's silence. No shouting, no mocking, just quiet chewing. That's your standing ovation. If the meat disappears and no one curses your name, you did well. You lived. You've spent all day over flames, pouring sweat into pots, blistering your palms on iron pans, and still, the greatest threat isn't the kitchen catching fire. It's serving food that isn't fully cooked. Because in the medieval world, undercooked food doesn't just cause indigestion. It causes rumors, rebellion, and sometimes death. One bad meal can become a crime scene. And guess who's the prime suspect? There are no thermometers, no timers, no modern sanitation. You test by look, by smell, by poking with a knife and hoping the juices aren't pink. You can't trust the meat. Half the time it's been hanging too long or not long enough. Venison, still warm from the kill, might be crawling inside. Fish that looks fresh might have spent half the day under a damp cloth in the corner. You don't cook it, you exercise it. If something comes out underdone, the nobles won't blame the fire. They'll blame you. The food is cold, your fault. The meat is too red. You're clearly trying to poison someone. The duck still bleeds? That's a death threat in edible form. You weren't being artistic. You were plotting. No one asks about the fire that dipped mid-roast or the scullion who mixed up the trays. They point to your knife, your pot, your hands, and the fingers start to wag. And when nobles fall ill, even slightly, all hell breaks loose. A stomachache becomes a scandal. A faint becomes a full-blown accusation. The cook tried to kill me, they'll say, between heaves. Doesn't matter that they drank 6 goblets of sour wine and ate a moldy pear off someone else's plate. If someone gets sick, you get punished. Punishments vary. A public beating, a deduction in wages, a night in the stocks, or worse, dismissal. Which might sound like mercy until you realize you've been tossed out into the countryside with no coin, no food, and a reputation for culinary treason. You're branded not as a cook, but as a menace. So you overcook everything, just to be safe. You boil meat until it loses shape. You roast until it crackles. You slice it thin, cook it twice, serve it hot and smoking and drier than the Lord's humor. Better they complain about texture than whisper about treachery. Because undercooked food isn't just a mistake. In this world, it's a motive, it's a threat, it's a knife pointed at your own throat, carried on a silver platter. In the medieval kitchen, paranoia is as common as parsley, especially when it comes to poison. Every dish you prepare, no matter how innocent, is treated with suspicion. Nobles don't just worry about taste, they worry about treachery. And you, the cook, stand directly in the blast zone of their paranoia. Because who has the most access to their food? Who handles every ingredient, every spice, every goblet? You. And that makes you a walking threat, even if all you're trying to do is not burn the stew. Rumors of poison flow faster than wine. A noble feels lightheaded after dinner? Poison. A guest gets a rash? Poison. Someone burps louder than usual? Must be poison. They leap to conclusions like it's a sport. Never mind the rotten fish, the week-old venison, or the wine that's turned to vinegar. No one wants to admit their indulgence made them sick, so they invent plots, assassins, political enemies, and always the cook. You could be loyal, trusted, years in the same kitchen. It won't matter. One bad clam and you're suddenly a suspect. The stew you stirred is now a suspicious substance. The sauce you seasoned is now a toxin. Where did you get this basil? Who prepared this duck? Did anyone taste it before it was served? Suddenly, you're surrounded by knights gripping swords while you hold a wooden spoon and try to remember if you washed your hands. And poison doesn't have to be real to ruin you. The fear is enough. Some lords demand food tasters. Others have meals prepared in duplicate in separate rooms to compare. Some require you to eat a portion first, right in front of them. Your own version of Russian roulette, medieval edition. And if you hesitate, they assume guilt. You're not afraid of burns or cuts or rats. You're afraid of guilt by suspicion, because once the idea of poison is in the air, you can't get rid of it. It taints everything. If you're lucky, they replace you quietly. If you're unlucky, they parade you through the courtyard, accuse you publicly, and offer you to the crowd. Maybe the bishop intervenes, maybe not. Either way, your career's over. Your name becomes a whispered warning. Don't trust a cook with secrets. So you learn to be careful. You watch your ingredients like a hawk. You keep records, not for yourself, but for defense. You speak softly. You stay neutral, because in the medieval kitchen, cooking is already a gamble. But once poison panic hits, it's a war, and your only weapon is not dying first. The pantry isn't a sanctuary, it's a battlefield. It's where you store food, yes, but it's also where food goes to die, mutate, ferment, and fight back. In the medieval kitchen, the pantry isn't just filled with ingredients. It's filled with creatures, molds, crawling things, and the very essence of spoilage. It doesn't smell like promise. It smells like rot, damp wood, and quiet betrayal. You open the door and immediately feel the temperature drop. Not because it's cool, but because it feels wrong. Barrels sweat. Crates creak. Sacks bulge with more than just grain. Rats scurry, bold and unashamed, making eye contact before darting into holes you can't seal. You lay traps. They laugh. You patch holes. They chew new ones. Some cooks swear they've seen rats that walk on two legs and tip their hats in mockery. Your flour is full of weevils. Your dried fruit has fermented into jam against its will. Your apples are spotted. Your onions sprouting green hairs. If it's not crawling, it's molding. If it's not molding, it's souring, and still you use it. You shake out the bugs. You slice around the soft spots. You blow on the mold and call it aged. Because you have no choice. Storage is a cruel joke. Barrels leak. Lids warp. Cloth sacks tear. You stack shelves high and pray gravity is kind, but eventually something crashes down in the middle of the night. You wake to broken jars, spilled lentils, and a smell that can only be described as ancient evil meets pickled cabbage. You clean what you can. The rest becomes tomorrow's stew. And then there are the surprises. A nest of mice inside the rice. A spider colony behind the smoked meats. One time, someone found a snake. No one knows how it got there, but it got cooked. No one asked questions. Even your spices aren't safe. Mice chew through saffron. Humidity clumps the pepper. The salt hardens into a brick you have to smash with a hammer. You guard your spices like they're treasure, because they are. But nothing is ever truly protected in a pantry that breathes like a beast in the dark. So you learn to navigate it. You bring a candle and a stick. You talk to the rats like they're co-workers. You pray to the saints of preservation. Because the pantry isn't dead storage. It's very much alive. And every time you open that door, you're not just collecting ingredients. You're entering the lair of something that's watching you back. You might think the hardest part of your job is preparing food. It's not. It's what comes after. Because once the last roast is devoured, the last goblet drained, and the nobles retire to argue about land and lineage, you begin the true trial. Cleaning. Not polite tidying, not a quick wipe with a cloth. We're talking scorched pots, smeared trenchers, spilled grease, crusted stew, and floors so filthy they have their own texture. The medieval kitchen is not just a workplace. It's a disaster zone in permanent motion. There is no running water, no soap, no steel wool. Just cold buckets from a stream that might already be home to 3 dead birds and 1 confused sheep, and a rag that's more holes than fabric. Every pot weighs as much as a small child and is covered in a hardened paste of soot, blood, and mystery matter. You scrape them clean with a stick, a stone, or your own fingernails. You dump ash inside and swirl it like a curse, hoping the grit removes what hot water can't. The knives are worse. Covered in fat, dulled by fire, and often lost in the muck. You find them days later beneath a stack of bones or lodged in a log someone mistook for a carving board. If you don't clean them, they rust. If you do clean them, they still rust, just with a bit more ceremony. You dry them with your apron, which is already soaked with broth, sweat, and failure. The floors are sentient. Layers of grease, spilled ale, vegetable peels, and whatever the rats dragged in. You sweep with a broom made from twigs and a prayer. The dirt never leaves. It just rearranges itself. One corner becomes less disgusting only because another corner has accepted more filth in its place. And heaven help you if the Lord's tableware makes it back with a scratch or stain. Goblets must shine. Platters must gleam. You polish silver with cloths soaked in vinegar and spit. Your arms ache, your knuckles crack, and you keep going because you know, if a noble lifts a plate and finds a speck of last night's sauce, you will be called forward. You'll be asked to explain. And the phrase, "it was a busy night," has never, ever saved a cook. So, no, you're not just cooking. You're cleaning. Constantly. Endlessly. Viciously. Before the meal, after the meal, in between every task. You scrub not for hygiene but for survival. Because in the medieval kitchen nothing stays clean. But you must. If you think the medieval kitchen is just a place for cooking, you've missed the other half of the story. It's also an incubator. For illness. For infection. For everything. It's a cauldron, not just of food, but of disease. A steaming, sweating, rat-infested petri dish where germs spread faster than gossip, and no one knows what sanitation means. You don't catch colds here. You catch curses. Start with the air. Thick with smoke, grease, and human sweat, it's barely breathable. Your lungs sting. Your nose runs. You're always coughing, always clearing your throat. Most assume it's from the fire. It's not. It's from everything living in the walls. Mold, spores, 1,000 things too small to see and too stubborn to die. You sleep in it, you work in it, you inhale sickness with every breath and call it normal. Your hands never heal. Tiny cuts from knives, burns from pots, scrapes from hauling wood. Each one is a welcome mat for infection. They fester, they ooze. You wrap them in rags and keep cooking, because there's no choice. Bandages are rare. Ointments are expensive. Most of the time, you're just waiting to see which wound turns black first. There are lice, fleas, bedbugs. If you think you're safe because you're working around heat, you're wrong. They survive, they thrive. You itch constantly, under your tunic, in your sleeves, between your toes. You scratch until you bleed, then wipe your hand on your apron and move on. The nobleman might have silk, but the cook has scabies. And then there's the foodborne fun. Parasites in the meat, worms in the fish, botulism in the preserved goods. You can't see it. You just pray you don't get the bowl with the twitch. If you do, you sweat through the night, curled beside the fire, hallucinating beetles and trying not to die. You call it a bad turn. The priest calls it penance. The steward calls it replaceable. Worst of all is the plague. When it comes, and it always comes, it hits kitchens first. The rats are here, the fleas are here, and the bodies are close. One cough becomes 5, one boil becomes 20. You lose half the staff before the Lord even hears about it. And still, meals must be served. The kitchen runs until it can't, until the scullions collapse, until the fires go cold. In the medieval kitchen, disease isn't a surprise. It's a co-worker, a constant. It lives in the bread, in the stew, in your cracked fingernails. You don't try to escape it. You just try to outlast it. If you thought working in a medieval kitchen meant teamwork, camaraderie, or even a shred of support, allow yourself a brief moment to laugh. Because in this world, help is a myth, a dream, a whisper passed between exhausted cooks who remember when old Tilda still had both hands and a functioning knee. In reality, you have no help, only blame. Tasks multiply, accidents happen, and when something goes wrong, everyone's looking at you. Your assistants? Half are children. The other half are barely qualified to breathe near a fire, let alone work one. They drop things, they spill things. They confuse vinegar with oil and mistake wax for butter. Ask one to skin a rabbit and they'll cry. Ask another to stir the pot and they'll fall in. You spend more time fixing their mistakes than preparing the meal. And yet, when the meal arrives cold or the dish lacks character, it's not the boy who mismeasured. It's you. You delegate cautiously. You explain slowly. You watch everything. Because one mishandled pot, one wrong herb, and it's not just the dish that gets ruined, it's your reputation. And if a noble complains, the steward doesn't summon the scullion who oversalted the meat. He summons you. You're the face of the failure, the person to scold, to punish, to threaten with dismissal or flogging, even if the only thing you touched was the garnish. Worse, sometimes your own staff blames you too. They're scared. They want to stay invisible. So when the Lord's hound vomits after chewing a lamb bone, the lad who cooked it suddenly was only following your orders. The girl who forgot to boil the turnips swears she was told to prioritize the peas. It's a kitchen of shadows and whispered cover-ups. When things go right, no one notices. When things go wrong, you become the story. And there's no reward for bearing the weight. You don't get extra rations, or a dry bed, or a clean shirt. Just more tasks, more pressure, and more reminders that perfection is expected, and anything less will be remembered. Mistakes are not forgiven. They're filed, used later, held over your head like a cleaver waiting to fall. So you cook with one eye on the fire and one over your shoulder. You triple-check every dish. You take blame in silence. Because that's the only constant in this kitchen. Not help, not fairness. Just you, and the blame that never leaves your hands. After you've cooked for the nobles, their guests, their guards, their priests, and their parasites, You might imagine there's a hot meal waiting for you. There isn't. You feed everyone else first. Always. And when all the polished trenchers have been cleared, when every silver bowl has been scraped and the dogs have been fed their share of the scraps, then, and only then, do you eat. What's left, if anything. The staff meal is not a second course. It's an afterthought. A lukewarm heap of whatever didn't hit the floor or get sucked into a noble's appetite. Pottage that's more water than substance. Bread so hard it could be used as a shield. Bits of vegetable mash spooned into bowls that still smell of last week's eel stew. You eat in silence, back hunched, sitting on crates or leaning against the wall, surrounded by the smoldering aftermath of service. And even then, you don't get to relax. Because while you eat, the real last course begins. Feeding the animals. The dogs come first. Those sleek, pampered hounds who roamed the feast hall, snatching bones from trenchers and growling at servants. You scrape what you can into their bowls, watch them eat better than half the staff, and pretend it doesn't insult your very soul. They lick their chops and saunter off while you chew through gristle. Then there are the pigs. Chickens. Stable cats. You carry slop to troughs. Scatter grain. Scrape spoiled leftovers into the compost for the next attempt at fermentation. You feed creatures that never thank you, often attack you, and smell worse than the pantry on a humid day. You do it because it's expected. Because everything in the manor eats before you matter. You used to be angry. Now you're numb. You barely taste the food. You eat because you have to. Because your body won't survive tomorrow's labor on an empty stomach. You eat with burned hands, bleeding fingers, and a mind that's already counting the next day's meals. And the cruelest part? Some days the animals look healthier than the staff. Fatter, shinier, better fed. And no one questions it. Because in this world, status is carved not just on plates, but in the order of who eats first. Nobles, guests, guards, dogs, and then finally, cooks. You'd think once the feast is over, your job ends, but that's not how the medieval kitchen works. Because in a world without refrigeration, every leftover is both a liability and a ticking clock. You don't toss food unless it walks out on its own. You salvage. You repurpose. You fight time. Leftovers aren't rest. They're a second shift. First, the collection. As soon as the nobles stagger from the hall, you gather what's left behind. Half-gnawed bones, greasy trenchers, untouched pies that someone decided didn't feel festive enough. You scrape plates into buckets, separate bone from bread, fat from flesh. Nothing is wasted. Everything gets sorted, some for reuse, some for animals, some for servants, and a portion for you. Maybe, if there's anything clean enough to salvage. Then comes the preservation. You boil what needs saving. Drench meats in vinegar. Pack scraps into crocks of salt, if you're lucky enough to have any left. If not, you bury them in oats or mash and hope the cold keeps them quiet overnight. You tie cloth over bowls, rub down bread, dry fruit by the fire. You work. Because every scrap you save is one less ingredient you'll need to beg for tomorrow. Leftovers also mean decisions. That pottage? Stretch it. Add stale bread. Toss in wilted greens. The roast from 2 days ago? Mince it, bake it into a pie, bury it under herbs, and no one will know it's recycled shame. Spoiled milk? Turn it into cheese, or at least call it cheese and hope no one asks questions. And just when you think you're done, someone decides to snack. The steward strolls in, drunk and full of opinions, demanding a slice of something. The priest wants broth to aid digestion. A guard finishes his shift and looks for meat. You can't refuse. You reheat, rearrange, reserve. You smile, you comply, because what's left isn't yours. It's still theirs, just in a slower form. Cleaning up leftovers is dangerous work, too. Meat spoils fast. Rats invade faster. And once mold sets in, it doesn't stop. You check everything with your nose, your eyes, your fingers. You prod it, poke it, pray over it. Because if you guess wrong, someone gets sick and you get blamed. So, no, leftovers aren't rest. They're work. Quiet, unseen, dangerous work. And they follow you into the night, into the cold, into the dreams you barely remember. Because in this kitchen, food never truly leaves. It just changes shape and demands more of you. There are no holidays in the medieval kitchen, not for you. No weekends, no lazy mornings, no time to breathe. While nobles mark the calendar with saints' feasts and festivals, you mark it by firewood supply and how close your joints are to failing. Because even on holy days, someone has to cook. Someone has to feed the manor. And guess who that someone is? You wake with the sun, if you ever truly slept. Your body aches. Your hands throb. You move through the dark like a ghost, already calculating what you can make from what's left, what's spoiled, and what's been stolen. The fire gets lit. Water is hauled. Wood is chopped. There is no delay, no excuse. Rain, snow, plague, famine, it doesn't matter. The kitchen runs every day, and so do you. Sundays? That's when church demands even more. Special bread, broth for fasting, an extra tray for the priest, and if a holy guest arrives, so does their appetite. You cook while everyone else prays. You serve while they sing. Your only sermon is the hiss of grease. Your only hymn, the clang of iron. Sick? Too bad. There's no backup, no rest. You bleed through a burn, cough through a fever, limp through a pulled muscle. If you stop, the machine stops. And no one wants to hear excuses from a cook. I'm ill becomes he's replaceable. You keep going until you collapse. Then you get replaced anyway. The seasons don't offer relief. They sharpen the edges. Winter freezes everything. The hearth is a desperate island of warmth in a stone box filled with ice and damp. Your boots stay wet for weeks. Your breath fogs the air while your hands try to skin a rabbit. In summer, you sweat so much your skin boils in its own salt. Your shirt sticks to you. The air chokes, you faint by the fire and wake up to someone telling you to stir faster. Even nights don't bring peace. There's cleanup, prep for tomorrow, fire to stoke. Sleep is something you steal in moments, slumped by the hearth, head on the table, spoon still in hand. You dream of silence, but wake to the clang of another pot and the call of another demand. Because in the medieval kitchen, rest isn't a right. It's a luxury. And you're not a person. You're part of the fuel. You're burned, scraped, reused, and expected to keep working, always. By now, your clothes are stiff with grease, your apron could walk on its own, and your hair smells like last week's stew. But don't think for a second that anyone expects you to be clean. In the medieval kitchen, bathing is less a habit and more a historical rumor. Not because people enjoy the filth, though you get disturbingly used to it, but because bathing is dangerous, rare, and absurdly inconvenient. You're not dirty by choice. You're dirty by design. First off, there's no hot running water. To bathe, you must haul buckets from a stream or, well, heat them over fire and fill a tub that leaks half its contents before you step in. And that's if you have a tub. Most cooks don't. You rinse your face in a bowl. You scrub your hands with ash. You wipe down with a cloth that smells worse than you do. That's the routine. When there's time, which there isn't. And even when you do clean yourself, it doesn't last. 10 minutes back in the kitchen and you're coated again. Smoke, sweat, flour, pig blood, and the mysterious sticky residue that lives on every surface. You're always moving, always sweating, always leaning into something that smears. You could bathe daily and still stink like a butcher's grave. There's also fear. Some believe that bathing opens your pores and invites sickness, that water draws illness out of the air and into your skin. Better to stay sealed in your filth, they say, than risk a chill. So even if you want to wash, someone might stop you. Are you trying to catch fever? You'll bring down the kitchen with that nonsense. Hygiene here is a superstition to be feared, not a standard to be met. Your clothes don't help. You wear the same set for weeks, maybe months, washed only if they catch fire or become so stiff they stand on their own. Your shirt has burn holes. Your trousers are soaked at the cuffs. Your apron is a crime scene, and yet it's better than the alternative, because the spare outfit has fleas. Eventually, your skin changes. You develop a permanent sheen of kitchen grime. Your hair mats into patterns. Your fingernails stain. You stop noticing the smell. Others do, but they're just as bad, and no one dares bring it up. Because in the medieval kitchen, bathing isn't a ritual of care. It's a forgotten luxury, a strange indulgence, a waste of firewood and time. You're not a person meant to be clean. You're meant to function, and filth is part of the uniform. If summer is a sweat-drenched torment, winter in the medieval kitchen is pure cruelty, colder, darker, meaner, and always unforgiving. Nothing works the way it should. Fires fight to stay alive. Ingredients freeze solid. Your fingers go numb before you can even tie your apron. Winter doesn't care that the nobles still expect their feasts. It comes anyway, through the cracks in the walls, through the dirt floor, into your bones. The kitchen is colder than the hall. The stone walls sweat and freeze. The air bites. You huddle near the hearth, and still you shiver. Your breath fogs in front of your face as you try to slice frozen meat with a rusted knife. Vegetables, if you have any, feel like rocks. The broth won't boil because the fire keeps choking on damp wood. You bend over the flames with tears streaming down your face, not from emotion, but from the smoke and cold conspiring against you. There's less food. The stores are low. Rats have eaten the grain. Mice got to the cheese. Half the salted meat smells off, but you can't afford to toss it. So you cook what you have, hoping the cold dulls your lord's taste buds. You use more salt, more vinegar, anything to mask the staleness. You cook wrapped in layers, your tunic damp and clinging, your fingers fumbling at every turn. Water is worse. The buckets freeze. The basin cracks. You chip ice with a ladle just to get enough to boil. Cleaning becomes impossible. Dishes stack up, crusted with cold fat and stubborn bread. You scrape them with a knife, then blow on your hands until you can feel your knuckles again. And there's the danger. The floor ices over. You slip, you fall. Pots crash. Burns happen faster when your reflexes are slowed by the cold. The fire becomes both savior and threat, your only source of heat, but one misstep and you're burned while shivering. The staff grows sick. Coughs echo through the hall. Red noses, pale faces. No one stops. No one rests. You just wrap a cloth around your mouth and keep going, because no one forgives a late dinner, not even in a blizzard. Winter doesn't shut the kitchen down. It just makes it harder, crueler, more dangerous. And you endure it because you have to. Because food must be made. Because the fire must burn. And because in this world warmth is earned one shivering meal at a time. Winter is cruel, But summer? Summer is merciless. It doesn't sneak in through the cracks or whisper across your toes. It pours in, heavy and relentless, turning the kitchen into a living furnace. The fire never stops. The air never cools. And you, poor cook, are trapped inside a stone box with walls that sweat and a ceiling that drips grease. The heat is inescapable. You breathe it, you wear it, you drown in it, you wake already sweating, and it only gets worse. By midday, your tunic clings to you like wet paper. Your feet squish inside your boots. Your skin itches, burns, blisters. You feel dizzy from the moment you start chopping onions, and not because of the onions. The hearth, your lifeline in winter, is now a fire-breathing demon. The flames roast not just the meat, but you. Standing near it feels like punishment, but you have to, because the food won't cook itself, and the nobles won't care that you're melting faster than the tallow in the stew. The air doesn't move. There's no breeze, no draft, just the constant hum of flies, the sharp sting of gnats, the buzz of wasps drawn to the smell of sugar and sweat. You swat them with greasy hands, which only makes them bolder. The food spoils faster. Milk turns sour before it reaches the table. Butter melts into puddles. Meats begin to stink before they hit the pan. You spend half your time sniffing ingredients trying to decide if they're edible or suicidal. And then there's the stench. It's everywhere. Stale beer, rotting vegetables, spoiled fat. The bodies of your coworkers who haven't washed in weeks. The kitchen becomes a swamp of scent and steam. You try not to breathe too deeply, but the heat makes you gasp. And every gasp brings the smell deeper into your bones. The nobles eat lighter in summer. More fruits, more chilled dishes, more requests for delicate flavors. As if delicate is something you can conjure from moldy cheese and wilted parsley. You sweat over chilled soup. You boil inside while they sip lukewarm wine under silk canopies. You feed them freshness while surrounded by decay. And when it's all done, there's still cleanup. Still heat. Still work. You want to lie down, to sleep in the shade, but the sun's still up. The kitchen is still hot, and dinner still needs making. Because summer doesn't excuse failure, it just guarantees suffering. Here's a cruel truth they never tell you when you become a cook in the Middle Ages. You'll spend every hour of your waking life preparing food for other people. Lavish, intricate, carefully seasoned dishes, and never get to taste a single bite. Not really, not with intention, not with pleasure. The food you make is not for you, it is for those above you. Your job is to feed them. Your reality is hunger. It starts with the taboo. Noble food is noble. It belongs to them. Touch it before it's served, and you risk everything. You might sneak a taste from a pot, dip a finger into a sauce. But if you're caught, theft if you're accused, poison if you're too eager. Greedy. There's no safe way to sample what you serve, even when it's your hands that prepared it. Your seasoning, your skill. Your curiosity is treason, and even when no one is watching, even when the ladle is yours and the dish is steaming, you don't taste for pleasure. You taste for survival. A pinch on your tongue, a flick to test bitterness. You don't savor, you analyze. You guess what the Lord will like and pray you guessed right. There's no time to sit, no time to enjoy. You're already on to the next dish. Your own food, when you get it, is an entirely different world. Crusts, scraps, cold stew. Bread you broke with your hands for others but couldn't claim for yourself. The smell of meat lingers on your skin, but never in your mouth. You smell roasted fowl, sugar glaze, simmering wine, but you eat barley mush. Your senses are taunted. Your stomach is reminded again and again of what it doesn't deserve. The worst part? You become numb. To flavor. To hunger. You forget what it feels like to eat something fresh, something hot, something meant to delight. Your taste buds fade under a steady diet of scraps and salt. You cook feasts but live on famine. You become the bridge between plenty and poverty, never allowed to cross. And no one asks, no one cares if the cook has eaten, because you are not part of the table. You are part of the mechanism that fills it. Your body is used, your skill is taken, and your hunger is assumed irrelevant. So, yes, you make beautiful food, but you don't taste it. You can't, because in this kitchen, flavor is privilege, and yours is long gone. Nobles are bad enough, but guests are worse, because they don't know you, they don't fear you, and they love to talk. Every traveling baron, every gossiping bishop, every cousin of a cousin with land and a title, they all arrive with an appetite and an opinion. And once your food hits their plate, your fate is in their mouths. They judge everything, not just the flavor, not just the heat, but the idea of the meal. Is it trendy? Is it local? Is it exotic enough to brag about later in someone else's hall? You roast a duck and suddenly it's quaint. You serve a spiced lentil stew and someone asks if it's too Moorish. If the bread's too dense, it's provincial. If the meat's too tender, it's suspicious. And all the while, your name is being whispered, not with praise but with speculation. You're not present in the hall, but your work is. It walks the room in platters and bowls, and every guest becomes a self-declared expert. They compare your meal to a feast they had 2 winters ago in the court of some duke you'll never meet. They talk about your fish like they caught it. They tear into your pastries and call them a touch dry, while crumbs fly from their open mouths. But the real threat isn't the complaining, it's the talking afterward. Guests travel. They carry tales. And those tales shape your reputation. A single bored noble with a sharp tongue can stain your name across 3 counties before you've even washed the dishes. The roast was passable, but the cook had no imagination. That's all it takes. Suddenly, your lord is asking if you're losing your edge, if the kitchen needs refreshing, if a new face might elevate the table. You can't defend yourself. You weren't there. You didn't speak. You just worked. Sweated over the fire, stayed up all night, carved every dish with blistered hands, and now your future hangs on the whim of someone who couldn't tell rosemary from ratweed. The only feedback you ever get is second-hand and sharpened. So when the guest list expands, your dread grows. Not because you'll cook more, but because you'll be judged more. More mouths, more gossip, more danger, and less control. Because in a world ruled by status and rumor, every guest is a critic, and every critic holds your job in their teeth. There are no cookbooks in your world, no inked pages to guide you, no tidy list of ingredients and measured steps, no 5 ways to prepare venison, or how to charm a noble with soup. If you want to learn how to cook in the Middle Ages, you do it the hard way, by watching, by failing, by guessing, by surviving long enough to remember what worked. Instructions come in grunts, in half-remembered phrases from a former cook who left in the night. Boil it till it hums. Spice it like your sins depend on it. Add vinegar when the moon's thin. You try to follow these riddles while juggling 20 other tasks and a kitchen full of chaos. You ask questions. You're told, you'll know when it's right. You won't, but you'll nod anyway. Recipes are oral tradition, meaning they shift, warp, and vanish like smoke. What one cook calls a roasted eel pie, another calls a watery disgrace. Measurements are nonsense. A pinch, a handful, a goose egg's worth. Who knows what size goose they meant? You pour by instinct, mix by feel, and hope the gods are watching kindly. If you do find a written recipe, it's locked in Latin, or French, or both, and it assumes you already know how to make the base dish, own saffron, and have access to unicorn marrow. It was written for rich households with libraries and 10 staff per dish, not for your smoky, rat-bitten, blistered corner of the manor. So you build your own memory book, in your head. You remember that the Lord hates anything with garlic, that the steward likes fish, but only if it's fried in ale, that the bishop nearly choked on pepper once and now avoids anything darker than cream. You keep it all up there, juggling recipes like secrets. One mistake, and someone says you've forgotten your skill. But you never had a book to begin with. Cooking becomes less about food and more about instinct, ritual, fear, and luck. You stir clockwise because you always stir clockwise. You cut carrots thin because once you didn't and someone vomited. You salt by memory, not taste, because you can't taste. There is no learning curve. There is only learning fast. You get one chance to prove you know the dish. If it works, it's expected again. If it fails, you're questioned, maybe replaced, and always blamed. So, no, you don't have a cookbook. You have scars, and those cook are your recipes. In your kitchen, salt is sacred, pepper is power, and every sprinkle of spice carries not just flavor, but fear. Because in the medieval world, spices aren't just rare, they're mysterious. They arrive from lands no one's ever seen, wrapped in silk, priced like gold, and whispered about like they're cursed. And for a cook, they're as much about superstition as seasoning. You don't use spices casually. You use them like a sorcerer, carefully, nervously, reverently. A pinch too much and it's heresy. A pinch too little and the dish is unworthy. You grind cloves in silence, mutter over the cumin, and thank the saints when you find a single scrap of cinnamon hiding in the pantry like a blessed relic. Nutmeg, that's not a spice. That's divine intervention in powdered form. But every spice has rules. Pepper must be added during a waxing moon. Saffron only on feast days. Coriander can cure a fever, or cause one. Ginger should be buried with the dead to warm them in the afterlife. No one knows who invented these rules, but break them and you risk blame when something goes wrong. The fish went sour? You used the wrong herb. The baby was born with a crooked foot? You stirred rosemary with your left hand. Your stew gave someone the runs? Clearly the time was picked on a Monday. And woe to the cook accused of using spice for unnatural reasons. Love spells, illness, influence. Add too much flavor to the wrong dish and you're no longer a chef, you're a suspect. Did you charm the Lord's appetite? Did you bewitch his dreams? It doesn't take much for seasoning to become sorcery. Some kitchen hands have vanished over lesser accusations. You don't question where the spices come from. You know they come with risk. Smuggled in sacks, traded for favors, handled like secrets. You're told to use them wisely, which means not too often, and never for the wrong mouth. Save the saffron for the feast, the pepper for the priest, and always hide the bay leaf when the mistress is in a mood. She thinks it causes miscarriages. So you work with caution. You season with trembling hands and muttered prayers. Because in the medieval kitchen, spice is not just a luxury, it's a gamble, a ritual, a dangerous kind of magic. If the Lord runs the land, the lady of the manor runs the kitchen. And she does it without ever stepping inside. She doesn't need to. She controls everything from above, hovering like a hawk, directing with sighs and frowns, rewriting your menu with vague instructions passed down through terrified maids. She's refined, regal, ruthless, and to you, cook, she is a nightmare in lace. Her orders arrive in the morning, scrawled on parchment that smells like rosewater and judgment. Something light but hearty, delicate but filling, comforting yet surprising. What does that mean? No one knows. She won't explain. She just expects it to appear, and when it doesn't, she raises an eyebrow so sharp it could slice your career in half. She fancies herself a culinary expert, which means she's read 3 recipes from a monastery cookbook and now believes she understands the complexities of rabbit pâté and saffron custards. She'll suggest combinations that make no sense: sweet fish, onion jam, rose petal gravy, and if you don't comply, she accuses you of lacking imagination. But when it fails, who let the cook do that? Her mood changes like the wind. One day she wants everything served cold. The next, she insists on roast pheasant steaming, but not too hot. She decides to fast, after you've already started cooking. She bans garlic, then demands the dish like we had last Lent, which had garlic. Her memory is selective, her preferences unpredictable, her wrath legendary. You never see her sweat. She wafts through the manor like a scented breeze, always composed, always critical. She sends back dishes with notes in perfect penmanship. Too bland, too rich, too familiar. No solutions, just disappointment. And if guests are present, she becomes a performer, sighing over your pie as though it personally wounded her, raving about a dish you didn't make as if you were invisible. And you are invisible, unless something goes wrong. Then she knows your name, says it with a hiss. The cook. Like a curse, like a failure wrapped in soot and shame. But you keep cooking, because she doesn't cook. She doesn't even know where the salt is kept. Yet, somehow, she controls everything you make, and if the food delights, she takes credit. I told them to try it that way. If it doesn't, well, you already know whose fault that will be. In the medieval kitchen, loyalty earns you nothing. Skill buys you a little time. But no matter how long you've worked, how many meals you've saved, or how many guests you've impressed, one truth follows you like smoke. You are always replaceable. And worse, everyone knows it. There's always someone waiting, someone younger, cheaper, hungrier, a farmhand's daughter who's good with herbs, a widow with a strong stirring arm, a monk who once boiled porridge for a bishop. None of them know what you do. None of them understand the pressure, the pain, the politics of feeding a manor on scraps and superstition. But the Lord sees fresh hands. The mistress hears praise. The steward smells an opportunity to tighten the budget. And you feel it in every review, every question, every silence. They stop complimenting your broth. They ask about alternatives. They mention how that lad from the lower manor cooked quite well. You're not being dismissed, not yet. But your time is being measured. And it's always ticking. There's no job security, no legacy, no retirement. You don't climb a ladder, you cling to it. One mistake, one illness, one complaint, and you're out. Replaced, forgotten. You trained your assistants too well? They'll take your place. You missed a step in the roast? There's a boy who swears he won't, and when they find someone new, they don't tell you gently. They just stop asking. You leave the same way you came in, quietly, anonymously, covered in flour and failure. Maybe they'll give you a crust for the road. Maybe not. You'll hear your name in the hall later. Not as praise, but as a warning. Don't end up like him. So you work harder. Say less. Take the blame. Hide the burn. Smile when they frown. Because in this world, no matter how good you are, how much you give, you are replaceable. And the kitchen never stops. The kitchen is not a room. It's not a workplace. It's a battlefield. You enter it like a soldier, tired, armored in linen and scars, carrying ladles like weapons. There's no quiet, no peace, only the endless clash of iron pots, the screech of knives on bone, the bark of orders, the hiss of steam. From sunrise to long past sunset, it is war. You fight for space. The counters are never clear. The hearth is never free. You dodge scullions, swerve past boiling kettles, duck under swinging pans. You step on spilled grain, slide across fat, narrowly avoid falling into open flames. Every movement is a risk. Every gesture must be fast, precise, survival-oriented. You fight for time. Deadlines come like arrows. The pheasant must be done by noon. The stew must be ready for the bishop's toast. The feast must start before the sun touches the chapel. You juggle dishes like a juggler on fire. There are no second chances, no late plates. Time doesn't bend in your favor. You bend yourself. You fight each other. Tempers snap. Voices rise. A missed step becomes an accusation. A dropped ladle sparks an insult. You argue over spices, over firewood, over space to breathe. Friendships fray. Alliances shift. One moment you're sharing ale, the next you're slapping someone's hand off your trencher. And still, you keep cooking. Because the real enemy isn't each other. It's the clock, the demand. The kitchen eats people. It devours energy, swallows dreams, and spits out hollowed men and women who no longer notice the burn on their hand or the blood on their boot. The fires roar. The floor steams. The air chokes. You cough, sweat, shout, and stir. You carry your wounds like medals. You earn no rest. And when the bell rings, when the nobles gather and the food is served, there's no celebration. No applause. Just silence or complaints. And then the battle starts again. Clean, prepare, brace, because the kitchen doesn't stop. And it doesn't care if you've survived. It just cares if you show up for the next war. There's a moment, every evening, when the kitchen goes still, just for a breath. The fires crackle, the pots simmer, and in the quiet you hear them. The rats, scratching, scurrying, celebrating. Because in the medieval kitchen, the rats are not just pests, they're regulars, well-fed, well-organized, and, insultingly, doing better than you. They eat first, they eat often, and they eat everything. Before your hands reach the grain sack, they've already tunneled in and thrown a feast. Before the cheese hits the shelf, a family of rodents has claimed it for themselves. They nibble at meat, chew through apples, dig into the bread loaves, and they're smart. They know when you're distracted. They know where you store the good stuff, and they take it every night, without thanks. You set traps, they spring them, you lay poison, they ignore it, or worse, leave you a chewed piece beside your knife like a joke. Some swear the rats know your schedule, that they wait for your back to turn, that they come in waves, like soldiers, like colleagues, except they're cleaner, faster, and they sleep more, and somehow they look healthier. Their fur shines, their bellies are round. They scamper with the energy of creatures who haven't spent the day boiling their fingers in a stew pot. They live in the walls you'll never reach, under floors you'll never scrub clean. They feast in the dark while you chew on crusts in silence. Worst of all, no one punishes them. If a rat eats the bishop's bread, the bishop never knows. If you serve stale bread, it's your fault. If a rat ruins the flour, you should have stored it better. If a rat is spotted during dinner, you're the one who gets blamed, while the rat escapes, smug and satisfied, probably dragging a fig with it. And you start to wonder, are they winning? Are they the real masters of the kitchen? They live off scraps and still come out ahead. You serve nobles and still go hungry. They scamper, you slog, they dine, you serve. Yes, the rats eat better. They don't cook, they don't clean, and they don't care. But you still do, for some reason. With all the fire, the filth, the sleepless nights, the sickness, the scraps, the blame, the bruises, the burns, and the biting rodents, you'd think you'd quit. You'd think anyone sane would run. But you don't. You stay. You cook. Because in the end, for reasons you can't even explain, you need to. It's not for glory. No one praises the cook. It's not for comfort. The kitchen gives none. It's not for money. You're paid in stale bread and the privilege of starting over every morning. No. You cook because someone has to. Because the fires need feeding. Because the bell will ring. Because people will get hungry and the stew won't make itself. You've become more than a cook. You're a survivor. An alchemist. A magician with a knife and a blackened spoon. You turn rot into food. Panic into order. Nothing into something. You hold together a manor's worth of appetite with a pantry full of nearly not rotten roots and 4 ounces of vinegar. And still you create. Still you serve. The nobles will forget your name. The guests will gossip. The steward will scowl. The mistress will sigh. The fire will burn too hot. The floor will crack beneath you. But you'll keep going. Because the kitchen doesn't stop. And neither do you. And maybe, just maybe, you take a sliver of pride in it. Not in the thanks. There are none. Not in the reward. It's small, but in the fact that every dish placed before the high and mighty was carried there by you. Your hands. Your work, your endurance. You fed a castle with scraps. You turned scraps into meals. You turned meals into survival. You were burned, bruised, bitten, and blamed. And still you cooked.